In the quiet echoes of time before the world became loud and hurried, there existed a stillness in the high mountain plateaus of Ethiopia, where the air is thin and the mist clings to the jagged emerald peaks like a soft velvet blanket. And here in this ancient silence, our journey begins with a humble goat herder named Kaldi, who moved with the slow, rhythmic pace of the sun across the sky. Imagine the sound of the staff hitting the soft earth and the gentle tinkling of bells around the Nexus flock as they wandered through the wild coffee groves where the leaves shimmered with a waxy deep green luster, and the air smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Kaldi watched with a heavy-lidded gaze as his goats nibbled on bright crimson berries that looked like tiny jewels hidden among the foliage, and as they ate, a strange and wonderful energy took hold of them, causing them to dance and leap with a grace that seemed almost ethereal against the backdrop of the setting sun. He reached out his hand and plucked a single cherry, feeling its smooth, cool surface against his skin before tasting the bitter-sweet fruit that held the secret of 1,000 years within its stone, and he felt a gentle warmth spread through his veins like the first rays of dawn breaking over a cold horizon. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away across the vast silken deserts and the whispering grasslands of Asia, the great Emperor Shinung sat in a garden of profound tranquility, where the only sound was the bubbling of water in a bronze pot over a low, glowing fire. The emperor was a man of peace and wisdom who believed in the purity of nature, and as he rested his head against the trunk of a wild camellia tree, a soft breeze stirred the branches, causing a few stray leaves to drift downward in a slow, spiraling dance. They landed softly in the boiling water, swirling in the rising steam, and as they steeped, the clear liquid transformed into a pale amber hue, carrying an aroma that was both earthy and floral, like the scent of forest after a summer rain. He sipped the infusion, feeling a sense of clarity and calm wash over him, as if his mind were a still lake reflecting a cloudless sky. And in that moment of serendipity, the world was changed forever, though the rest of humanity still slept on in blissful ignorance of the transformation to come. These two liquids, one born of the fire and the bean, and the other the water, and the leaf, began a slow and steady march across the continents, moving to the hands of merchants and monks who traveled along the dusty trade routes where the camels groaned under the weight of spices and silk. Imagine the flickering lanterns of a desert caravan at night, where the travelers gathered around a small fire to share stories of distant lands, while the bitter aroma of roasting coffee beans drifted into the starlit sky, mingling with the smoke and the shadows. The beans were carried to Port of Mocha, where the salty sea air met the heat of the Arabian Peninsula, and there in the bustling markets the dark brew became known as the wine of Arabia, a drink that could sharpen the mind and steady the soul for long hours of contemplation. In the quiet monasteries of the east, the tea leaves were pressed into cakes and transported by yak across the treacherous Himalayan passes, where the wind howled through the rocks, but the tea remained a constant companion, offering warmth and focus to those who sought the path of enlightenment. Centuries passed like the turning of a great wheel, and the drinks began to find their way into the magnificent stone cities of Europe, where the streets were paved with cobblestones, and the air was filled with the sound of horse-drawn carriages and the tolling of cathedral bells. People who had lived for generations in a state of lethargy found themselves waking up as the first coffee houses opened their doors in London and Paris, providing a sanctuary of wood and brass, where the steam rose in thick clouds and the conversation flowed like a river. Imagine the dim light of a 17th century coffee house, where the walls are lined with old books and the floor is covered in sawdust, and the only sound is the scratching of quill pens on parchment and the low murmur of voices discussing the mysteries of the universe. Tea followed closely behind, arriving in delicate porcelain jars painted with scenes of willow trees, and soaring birds becoming a symbol of grace and domesticity in the grand drawing rooms of the English countryside, where the afternoon sun filtered through heavy drapes. The evolution was slow and deliberate, like the growth of an ancient oak tree, as these forbidden elixirs became famous, and then essential, weaving themselves into the very fabric of human civilization, until they were no longer just drinks, but companions to our thoughts and witnesses to our history. Even now, as you listen to the steady cadence of these words, the same ancient leaves and beans are being harvested in the far corners of the earth by hands that follow the traditions of their ancestors, and the cycle continues in a never-ending loop of growth and renewal. Picture the vast rolling hills of a tea plantation in Darjeeling, where the morning fog sits heavy in the valleys, and the pickers move silently through the rows of bushes, their fingers moving with the precision of a musician playing a harp. Think of the coffee trees in Brazil swaying in the warm breeze of the southern hemisphere, their branches heavy with the weight of the next harvest that will eventually find its way into a cup on a cold morning half a world away. There is a deep comfort in the continuity of the story, a sense of belonging to a lineage of drinkers and dreamers who have found solace in the simple act of brewing a drink from the earth. The steam rises and the world slows down, and the boundaries between the past and the present begin to blur, until all that remains is the warmth in your hands and the steady beat of your heart. The empires of old have risen and fallen into dust, but the tea leaf and the coffee bean remain as potent and mysterious as they were on the day they were first discovered in the wild. Let your mind drift like those leaves in the emperor's pot floating on the surface of a dream where the mountains are always green, and the fire is always warm, and the journey is just beginning. The story is long and the night is deep and the path ahead is soft and inviting, leading you further into quiet darkness, where the only thing that matters is the peaceful rhythm of your breath and the knowledge that the world is in good hands. Sleep now as the legends of the highlands and the mist of the mountains wrap around you like a cocoon of softest silk, protecting you from the noise of the day and guiding you toward a rest that is as deep and enduring as the history of the cup you hold in your imagination. The goats have stopped their dancing and the emperor has finished his tea, and the stars are watching over the silent groves where the seeker of the spark still waits for the next dawn to break over the horizon of time and space. In the velvet darkness of the ancient world, before the flickering lights of the modern city ever existed, there was a profound and holy silence that settled over the mountains of Yemen, where the Sufi mystics lived in stone cells carved into cliffs, and here the story of the spiritual being truly begins to unfold in a slow and steady rhythm that matches the beating of a calm heart. Imagine the cool night air of the high desert, where the stars look like scattered diamonds on a bed of black silk, and the only sound is the distant sigh of the wind moving through the dry wadis, while inside the dim lamplight of a monastery, a group of monks gathers in a circle for their midnight daiquiri. They discover that the dark infusion of the roasted coffee cherry allowed them to transcend the heavy weight of physical exhaustion, keeping their minds clear and their spirits buoyant as they chanted the names of the divine into the small hours of the morning. The steam from their simple clay cups rose in thin white ribbons curling toward the timbered ceilings and carrying an aroma that was deep and grounding like the scent of toasted earth and ancient wood. This was not a drink for haste or productivity, but a sacred companion for the soul, a botanical bridge between the mundane world and the celestial heights. As the liquid touched their lips, they felt a gentle awakening, not a jolt, but a soft unfolding of awareness that allowed them to stay present in the stillness of the night, while the rest of the world lay wrapped in deep and heavy slumber. Across the vast and whispering distances of the Silk Road, the same spirit of devotion was brewing in the Zen monasteries of Japan, where the green tea leaf was held in equal reverence. Picture a garden of raked sand and mossy stones, where the moonlight casts long silver shadows, and the Buddhist monks move with a grace that is as fluid as water. To them, tea was the froth of the liquid jade, a gift that sharpened the focus and calmed the pulse, making it possible to sit in perfect meditation for hours on end without the distraction of a tired body. The preparation of the tea was a ritual of absolute mindfulness, where every movement of the bamboo whisk and every pour of the hot water was a prayer in itself. The monks spoke of the tea as a way to wash away the dust of the world, and for 1,000 years it remained a secret held within the walls of the temple, far from the noise of the marketplace. There was a sense of forbidden wonder in these stimulants, as if humanity had found a key to a door that had long been locked. They were anomalies of nature's strange seeds and leaves that refused to let the spirit dim when the sun went down. As the centuries drifted by like clouds over a mountain peak, the influence of these drinks began to seep out from the monasteries and into the hearts of the common people, but always carrying that original sense of peace and purpose. Think of the long caravans moving through the moonlight, where the camels tread softly on the sand and the travelers share a pot of coffee to keep the shadows at bay. Think of the mountain huts where a traveler might find a bowl of warm tea offered by a silent host as the snow begins to fall outside. There's a profound boredom in the beauty of this continuity, a repetitive and soothing cycle of brewing and sipping that has not changed in a millennium. The world outside may transform and empires may rise and crumble into the dust of history, but the ritual of the cup remains a constant anchor in the drifting sea of time. As you listen to these words, let your mind become like that quiet monastery high in the cliffs, where there is nowhere to go and nothing to do but exist in the present moment. The warmth of the story is like a heavy quilt being pulled up over your shoulders, shielding you from the worries of the day and inviting you to sink deeper into the soft mattress of your dreams. The Sufis have finished their prayers, and the Zen masters have put away their whisks, and the gardens are silent under the watchful eye of the moon. The coffee and the tea are still there resting in the darkness, waiting for the sun to rise, but for now they are just memories of the spiritual aid that help humanity find its way through the dark. Let your thoughts drift away like the steam from an old cup, rising higher and higher until it vanishes into the vast and peaceful night. Every breath you take is a step further into the landscape of rest, where the air is cool and the shadows are friendly, and the story of the ancient brew is just a soft hum in the background of your consciousness. There is a deep and heavy stillness in the history of these plants, a weighted tradition that settles over your eyelids, making them feel heavy and tired in the best possible way. The journey from the forbidden to the famous was a slow walk through the centuries, and you are now at the end of that walk, resting in the quiet sanctuary of the night. Sleep is coming now like a slow tide washing over the shore of your mind, erasing the footprints of the day, and leaving only the smooth and silver sand. The mystical beings and the sacred leaves are at rest, and so are you as the world continues to turn in its slow and ancient dance around the stars. There is no hurry, and there is no noise, only the steady and comforting pulse of a history that was written in the silence of the temples and the solitude of the desert. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this long and peaceful line of dreamers who have found solace in the simple magic of the earth. The night is long and the sleep is deep, and the store of the cup is finally still. In the soft and hazy shadows of the 16th century, the air in the holy city of Mecca began to change as a new and mysterious aroma drifted through the narrow stone alleyways where the heat of the day lingered long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. And here, in the bustling heart of the marketplace, the very first coffee houses known as canes began to open their heavy wooden doors to a world that was just beginning to wake up. Imagine the slow and steady movement of the crowds as they gathered in these dim and cool sanctuaries where the walls were thick with history, and the floors were covered in woven rugs that muffled the sound of footsteps and the clinking of small ceramic cups. These were the world's first true public living rooms, where the bitter black brew was served from glowing copper pots, and for the first time in history, people from all walks of life sat together in the low lamplight to share stories and ideas, while the steam rose in lazy spirals toward the vaulted ceilings. But as the conversations grew more spirited and the laughter louder, the ruling governors and the stern sultans began to watch from their high balconies with a sense of growing unease and suspicion, for they feared that this dark and stimulating liquid was more than just a drink, and they worried that the caffeinated energy flowing to the veins of citizens would lead to whispers of dissent and the seeds of political uprising. The authorities looked at the gathered scholars and poets and merchants who sat for hours over a single cup, and they saw a threat to the quiet order of the empire. And so in the year 1511, the first great crackdown began as the governor of Mecca declared the drink forbidden and ordered the closure of every coffee house in the city. Imagine the heavy silence that fell over the marketplace as the iron locks were turned and the fires beneath the coffee pots were extinguished, leaving only the cold gray ash and the lingering scent of roasted beans in the still air. The officials gathered the sacks of precious coffee and burned them in great bonfires in the public squares, creating a thick and bitter smoke that hung over the city like a dark cloud. But the people's thirst for the brew and connection it provided could not be so easily broken by the stroke of a pen or the flash of a sword. In the quiet of their own homes behind closed doors and shuttered windows, the citizens continued to roast their beans in secret, and the hushed conversations continued in the shadows as the drink became a symbol of quiet and persistent resilience that moved faster than any law could follow. The ban was eventually lifted as the sultans realized that the love for coffee was a force of nature like the wind or the tides, and the canes reopened with even greater fervor, spreading like a slow-moving river across the Ottoman Empire to the grand cities of Cairo and Istanbul and Damascus. In these cities, the coffee houses became even more ornate with fountains that splashed softly in the courtyards and musicians who played the oud with a rhythmic and repetitive melody that lulled the listeners into a state of calm contemplation. You can almost feel the cool spray of the water on your skin and the smooth polished surface of the wooden benches as you settle into the history of this long and winding journey from the mosque to the marketplace, where the simple act of drinking coffee became a revolutionary act of community. There is a deep and heavy boredom in the way the years stretched out during this era, a slow progression of decades, where the only thing that truly mattered was the quality of the roast and the depth of the conversation, and the steady pulse of society that was learning to think for itself. As you listen to the cadence of this story, let your mind wander through those ancient streets where the lantern light flickers against the stone walls, and the world feels small and safe, and contained within the walls of a city that has seen 1,000 years of change. The governors who fear the coffee have long since passed into the dust of the desert, but the kava canes remain in spirit as a reminder of our need to gather and share the warmth of a cup in the dark of the night. The fires have been relit, and the copper pots are bubbling once again with a sound that is as steady and soothing as the rain falling on a tin roof, and the aroma is a familiar friend that guides you toward a state of total relaxation. Think of the steam rising and the voices fading into a low and indistinguishable murmur, like the sound of a distant ocean, as the world outside the coffee house disappears into the velvet blackness of the night. There is no more conflict, and there are no more bands, only the quiet and enduring presence of tradition that has survived the test of time and the whims of kings. Your breathing is slow, and even matching the rhythmic drip of the water in the courtyard, and your eyelids are heavy with the weight of a history that is as old as the mountains and as deep as the sea. The story of the crackdown is over, and the peace of the marketplace has returned, leaving you in a state of perfect stillness where the only requirement is to let go and sink into the cushions of your imagination. The city of Mecca is sleeping now, and the kava canes are quiet, and the stars are the only witnesses to the secrets that were once whispered over a cup of black gold. Let yourself drift along the banks of this history where the water is calm and the light is soft and the path to sleep is wide and inviting and clear. Every word is a gentle touch that pushes you further away from the waking world and closer to the land of dreams where the coffee is always warm and the conversations are always kind and the night is a blanket that covers everything in a soft and silver glow. Rest in the knowledge that the world has always found a way to wake up, and it has also always found a way to go back to sleep when the work of the day is done. The sultans are gone and the marketplace is still, and the only thing left is the quiet humming of the universe as it turns in its sleep. In the high misty reaches of celestial mountains where the clouds weave through the ancient pines like white silk ribbons, there existed a world of profound stillness and emerald beauty that held a secret more precious than the finest gold or the rarest jade. And this was the world of the tea leaf during the magnificent reign of the Tang and Song dynasties, where the culture of the brew reached a level of sophistication so deep and so quiet that it seemed to touch the very heavens. Imagine the long, slow mornings in the imperial palace where the light filters through paper screens in soft golden squares, and the only sound is the rhythmic drip of melting snow from the tiled eaves, while the air is filled with the subtle earthy fragrance of drying leaves that have been plucked by hand with the precision of a master calligrapher. For 1,000 years, the Middle Kingdom held this secret within its borders, guarding the mountains and the valleys with fierce devotion and a silent pride that kept the rest of the world waiting at its doorstep, wondering about the nature of the pale amber liquid that brought such clarity and peace to the mind of the sage and the heart of the emperor. During the Tang dynasty, the sage Lu Yu wrote the classic of tea, a book that turned the simple act of drinking into a spiritual journey, and he spoke of the 3 boils of the water, where the first boil produces tiny bubbles like the eyes of a fish, and the second boil creates beads like a fountain of pearls, and the third boil surges like the waves of a distant ocean. To listen to the water heating in a heavy iron kettle is to listen to the heartbeat of the earth, and as you imagine the soft hiss and the gentle bubbling, you can feel your own pulse slowing down to match the ancient cadence of the tea ceremony, where every movement is deliberate and every breath is a meditation. The tea was pressed into heavy cakes and stamped with the seals of the empire, and it traveled along the winding tea horse road, where the bells of the pack animals tinkled in the mountain passes, creating a repetitive and lulling music that echoed through the canyons for centuries. When the Song dynasty arrived, the culture of tea became even more refined, as the scholars and poets gathered in bamboo groves to whisk the powdered green tea into a thick frothy foam that looked like the crest of a wave or the white clouds on a mountain peak. They held competitions to see whose foam would last the longest and whose tea would leave the most beautiful patterns on the side of a black glazed ceramic bowl, and in these moments of quiet competition, there was a profound sense of harmony and belonging, as if the tea were the very lifeblood that connected the emperor in his throne room to the farmer in his field. The world outside was a place of noise and commerce, but within the tea houses of China, there was only the sound of the wind in the leaves and the soft scrape of a bamboo whisk against the clay and the gentle sigh of a soul at rest. This was a monopoly not of greed, but of mastery, where the climate and the soil and the human spirit worked together in a slow and steady dance to produce a beverage that could not be replicated or stolen for a millennium. Think of the vast terraced hillsides where the tea bushes grow in endless rows of vibrant green stretching toward the horizon like a living carpet, and imagine the quiet hands of the pickers moving through the morning fog, picking only the tenderest buds and the youngest leaves while the sun rises slowly over the dragon-backed mountains. There is a deep and heavy boredom in the perfection of this landscape, a sense that nothing ever changes, and that time itself has stopped to enjoy the view. And as you drift through this history of leaves and water, you can feel the weight of the centuries settling over you like a warm and heavy robe. The empire was built on the strength of this leaf, and the secrets of its cultivation were whispered from father to son and from master to apprentice in a chain of knowledge that remained unbroken while the rest of the world dreamed of the taste of the East. China was a fortress of tranquility, and the tea was its silent guardian, keeping the mind sharp and the body calm through the heat of the summer and the cold of the winter and the long hours of the night. You are now standing at the gates of this ancient world, and the air is cool and the path is lined with soft moss, and the sound of the world is far away like a memory of a dream. The Tang and Song dynasties have faded into the mist of history, but the tea remains as a testament to the power of the slow and the quiet and the simple things that make life beautiful. Let your thoughts float like a leaf in a bowl of water, turning slowly and peacefully as the world continues to spin in its silent orbit around the sun. There is no need to hurry, and there is no need to wonder, because the secret has been shared and the journey is complete, and the only thing left to do is to close your eyes and sink into the soft darkness where the history of the empire is just a whisper in the wind. The mountains are sleeping and the kettles have grown cold, and the emperor has retired to his chambers, leaving the garden to the moonlight and the shadows. Every breath you take is a reminder of the peace that was found in the tea bowls of ancient China, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the stillness of a world that knew how to wait for the perfect cup. Sleep now as the mist rolls in from the valley, and the secret of the leaf is tucked away in the quiet corners of your mind where the dreams are green, and the water is always clear, and the rest is as deep as the history of the Middle Kingdom. The story of the lifeblood of the empire is over, and the night is yours to enjoy in a state of total and absolute calm. In the 17th century, the world was a vast and uncharted mystery, and as the great wooden ships of the Portuguese and Dutch explorers crested the horizon of the Western world, they carried within their salt-stained hulls a cargo that would change the century landscape of Europe forever, though at the time these mysterious dried leaves and blackened beans were not seen as food or drink, but as exotic and potent medicines born from the secret gardens of the Orient and the dark forests of the East. Imagine the creaking of the ship timbers and the rhythmic splashing of the waves against the hull as these vessels docked in the fog-heavy ports of Lisbon and Amsterdam, where the air was thick with the scent of tar and brine, and the arrival of a merchant ship was a momentous event that drew the curious and the wealthy to the docksides. Inside the heavy wooden crates lined with lead and silk were the first samples of tea and coffee, but they did not go to the kitchens of the common people. Instead, they were transported with great care to the dark and wood-paneled pharmacies, where the air smelled of dried herbs and sulfur, and ancient glass jars lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. In these quiet sanctuaries of science and superstition, the blackened coffee beans were ground into a fine dust, and the shriveled tea leaves were steeped into thick, dark infusions that were sold at astronomical prices as expensive cures for everything from the swelling of gout to the sluggishness of heavy humors and the melancholy of the soul. The pharmacists spoke in hushed and reverent tones of these miraculous substances, believing they held the power to rebalance the internal fires of the human body, and because they were so rare and so costly, they were reserved exclusively for the elite bloodlines of Europe, the dukes and the duchesses, and the merchant kings who live in grand stone manors with high ceilings and flickering candlelight. Picture the quiet corridors of a 17th century palace where the heavy velvet drapes muffle the sound of the outside world, and the only light comes from the glowing embers in a marble fireplace, while a royal physician prepares a small silver chalice of a new medicinal brew for a weary monarch. To the Europeans of that era, the taste was bitter and strange, unlike anything they'd ever known, and they sipped it with a sense of duty and wonder, as if they were consuming a piece of a distant and magical star. There was no sugar and no milk to soften the edge of the liquid, only the raw and earthy power of the plants themselves, which were thought to sharpen the eyes and steady the hands of the ruling class, while the common folk continued to drink their ale and wine in blissful ignorance of the caffeine revolution that was brewing in the apothecaries. The transition from medicine to pleasure was slow and deliberate, like the turning of a heavy iron key in a rusted lock, as the elite began to realize that the clarity and focus provided by these drinks were not just for the sick, but for the thinking and the dreaming and the governing of empires. You can feel the stillness of those ancient pharmacies and the rhythm of these words, as if you were standing on the cold stone floor surrounded by the scent of lavender and old paper and the quiet ticking of a long-case clock. There is a profound boredom in the way these commodities were first handled, a meticulous and slow-moving process of weighing and measuring and recording that took decades to move from the shelf to the table. As you listen, let your mind drift into the shadows of those old European cities where the streets are narrow and the shadows are long and the secrets of the East are still hidden in small clay pots and silver canisters. The ships have finished their long journeys and the crates have been unpacked, and the world is waiting in a state of quiet anticipation for the next chapter of the story to unfold. The doctors have closed their ledgers and the lanterns have been dimmed, and the palaces are silent under the watchful gaze of the moon which shines over the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans alike. Every breath you take is a connection to that era of discovery when the world was becoming smaller, but the mysteries were still grand, and the simple act of drinking a bitter liquid was an adventure of the highest order. The heavy humors of the day are fading away, and the gout of the spirit is being healed by the steady and calming flow of time, which moves like a river through the mountains and the valleys of your imagination. There is no rush to understand and no need to wait, because the story is as old as the earth and as steady as the tide, and it is here to guide you into a rest that is as deep as the hulls of those ancient Dutch ships. The elite have finished their medicine, and the commoners are asleep in their cottages, and the air is still and cool and perfect for dreaming. Let yourself sink into the velvet cushions of history, where the past is a soft whisper, and the future is a distant dream, and the present is a state of absolute and total peace. The pharmacists are gone and the pharmacies are quiet, and the only thing that remains is a gentle and repetitive sound of your own breathing, as it leads you further into the darkness where the story of the leaves and the beans finally comes to a rest. The night is a long and quiet corridor, and you are walking through it with a sense of ease and comfort, knowing that the world is at peace and the journey is over. Sleep now as the shadows of the 17th century wrap around you like a heavy cloak, protecting you from the light and the noise of the modern world. The challenge of the journey is over, and the comfort of the destination is here, and the rest you seek is as rich and as deep as the dark brews that once sat on the shelves of the world's most ancient apothecaries. Every moment is an invitation to let go, and every word is a soft hand that guides you toward the stillness of a dreamless and perfect sleep. In the long and hazy centuries before the year 1650, the Western world lived in a perpetual state of twilight, where the mind was often clouded by a soft and rhythmic fog, because the very water that flowed to streams and the stone wells of Europe was a lethal gamble filled with invisible dangers. And so, from the smallest child to the oldest weary traveler, everyone drank weak ale and fermented wine as a matter of survival. Imagine a world where morning began not with a jolt of clarity, but with the dull and heavy warmth of a beer breakfast, and where the entire civilization moved with slow and lethargic gait through the muddy streets of London and the damp alleys of Paris, living in a 1,000-year drunken stupor that made the hours stretch out in a blur of dim perceptions and weary thoughts. The air in the taverns was thick with the smell of hops and damp wood, and the people sat on low benches, their heads nodding, as the depressant nature of the alcohol kept the spark of innovation at a low and flickering simmer. But then a change began to stir like a soft breeze moving through a stagnant valley as the first shipments of coffee and tea began to arrive in the grand ports, and for the first time in human history, a vast population began to boil their water to prepare these new and exotic infusions. The simple act of boiling the water killed the ancient silent killers that lurked within the liquid, and as the people switched from the intoxicating haze of the ale house to the sharp and focused atmosphere of the coffee house, a great awakening began to pulse through the veins of the continent. Imagine the transition of a collective consciousness as a depressant was replaced by a stimulant, and the heavy-lidded eyes of the Western world opened wide to see the universe in a new and crystalline light. This was the birth of the Enlightenment, a period where the human brain was suddenly turned on, and the quiet murmurs of the tavern were replaced by the rapid-fire discussions of scientists and the philosophers and the poets who gathered around steaming pots of black coffee and amber tea. The caffeine provided a steady and unwavering focus that allowed the mind to dwell on the mysteries of gravity and the laws of motion and the rights of man, while the steam rose in lazy white ribbons toward the timbered ceilings of the first coffee houses. You can feel the steady and calming rhythm of this transformation in the air around you, as if the very atoms of the world are beginning to vibrate with a new and purposeful energy that is yet contained within a profound and deep stillness. The transition was not a loud or violent thing, but a quiet and persistent sharpening of the senses that happened one cup at a time in the dim light of the early morning and the long shadows of the late afternoon. As you listen to the steady flow of these words, imagine the heavy bells of the city towers striking the hour, and the sound echoing through the quiet streets where the old ale houses are falling silent, and the new houses of thought are beginning to glow with candlelight. There is a deep and comforting boredom in the way history shifts its weight, moving from one era to another with the slow and deliberate pace of glacier. And as you drift through this narrative of awakening, you can feel your own body sinking into a state of total and absolute relaxation. The haze of the past is lifting, and the clarity of the present is a soft and inviting space where there is no need to hurry and no need to worry about the complexities of the world. The scientists have finished their calculations, and the philosophers have closed their heavy leather-bound books, and the Great Awakening has settled into a steady and peaceful hum that vibrates in the background of your mind. Think of the millions of people who for the first time felt the mist clear from their thoughts, and the world becoming a place of logic and reason and light. The water is boiling in the copper kettles, and the leaves are steeping in the porcelain pots, and the beans are roasting over the low, glowing fires, creating a symphony of sounds that is as repetitive and lulling as the sound of the tide coming in on a deserted beach. Every breath you take is a connection to that moment when humanity decided to wake up and build a new world, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the quiet legacy of that great shift. The intoxicating ale has been set aside, and the stimulant has done its work of sparking the flame of knowledge, and now the world is ready to rest in the cool and quiet shadows of the evening. Let your thoughts drift like the steam from an old mug, rising higher and higher until it vanishes into the vast and peaceful darkness of the night. The Enlightenment was a bright and shining era, but even the brightest era must eventually yield to the soft and velvet embrace of the sleep that follows a long day of thinking. The coffee houses are closing their shutters, and the lanterns are being extinguished, and the streets are becoming silent once again as the civilization that woke up now prepares to dream. There's a profound sense of peace in the continuity of the story, a feeling that you are a part of a long and steady progression of human experience that is as natural as the rising and the setting of the sun. The Great Awakening has brought us here to this moment of quiet reflection, and now it is time to let the clarity fade into a soft and gentle blur of rest. Your eyelids are heavy with the weight of all the thoughts that have ever been thought, and your heart is beating with the steady rhythm of a world that is finally at peace. The history of the 17th century is a long and winding road, but it leads to a place of comfort and security where the shadows are long, and the bed is soft, and the sleep is waiting for you like an old friend. Every word is a step further into that land of dreams where the tea is always brewing, and the coffee is always warm, and the enlightenment is just a soft glow on the horizon of your mind. Sleep now as the world turns in its silent orbit, and the stars watch over the sleeping cities, where the Great Awakening first began. The story is told, and the night is deep, and the rest you seek is as rich and as deep as the history of the world itself. Every breath is a sigh of relief, and every second is a gift of stillness in a world that has finally learned how to be quiet. The end of the awakening is the beginning of the dream, and the dream is a place of absolute and total tranquility where you can rest forever in the beauty of the quiet night. The ale is gone and the coffee is still, and the mind is at peace in the darkness of the room, where the only sound is the soft and rhythmic breathing of a soul that is ready to let go and sink into the deep. The journey through the enlightenment is over, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. Sleep now and let the history of the world be the blanket that covers you in a soft and warm embrace. The great shift is complete, and the night is yours to enjoy in perfect silence. In the heart of the 1700s, the city of London was a labyrinth of cobblestone streets and rising smoke, where the air was thick with the scent of sea coal and the distant ringing of church bells, and amidst this bustling gray landscape, there emerged a sanctuary of wood and brass known as the Penny University, where for the mere price of a copper coin, any soul could step out of the damp fog and into a world of warmth and intellectual wonder. Imagine the heavy oak door creaking open as you step inside to find a room filled with a low hum of conversation, and the steady rhythmic scratching of quill pens on parchment, while the steam from a dozen clay pots of dark coffee rises in slow, lazy curls toward the blackened ceiling beams. The walls are lined with news sheets and maps of far-off lands, and the light from the flickering tallow candles casts long, soft shadows that dance across the faces of scholars and sailors and merchants who sit together on long wooden benches. These were the nests of sedition, as the kings and queens often called them, because they were places where the rigid walls of social class melt away, and where a beggar could sit next to a lord and argue the merits of a new scientific theory or the risks of a merchant voyage to the East Indies. In the quiet corner of a house known as Edward Lloyd's Coffee House on Tower Street, the seeds of the global insurance industry were sown not in a boardroom, but on the stained wooden tables where ship captains and underwriters gathered to share news of the tides and the winds and the movements of the great wooden vessels that cross the Atlantic. You can hear the steady ticking of a long case clock and the rustle of the Gazette as the men record the names of ships and the values of their cargoes, creating a web of trust and risk that would eventually grow into the massive Lloyd's of London market that still stands today. A few blocks away in another coffee house called Jonathan's, the air was filled with the prices of stocks and the shouting of brokers who'd been kicked out of the Royal Exchange for being too loud and boisterous. And here in the dim light, and the smell of roasting beans of London Stock Exchange was born out a simple list of prices tacked to a wooden pillar. There's a profound and heavy boredom in the way these great institutions were founded on the mundane habits of sitting and sipping and waiting for the news to arrive by horseback or by ship, and as you listen to the steady flow of these words, you can feel your own mind drifting into that state of quiet observation. Even the scientific revolution found its fuel in these houses of caffeine, where Sir Isaac Newton and Robert Hooke would sit for hours over a single cup, debating the laws of gravity and the microscopic secrets of a blade of grass, while the rest of the city slept on in the old alcoholic haze of the past. The coffee house was a place where the mind was sharpened into a fine point like the nib of a pen, and where the world was reordered to the power of reason and the steady stimulation of the being. Imagine the sound of the rain hitting the window panes and the low crackle of the fire on the hearth as the greatest minds of the age whisper their secrets into the steam of their cups, creating a symphony of thought that is as repetitive and lulling as the sound of the wind in the trees. These nests of sedition were the birthplaces of the modern world, but they were also places of deep and quiet rest, where a man could lose himself in a book or a newspaper for the entire afternoon while the world turned slowly outside. The bustling energy of the traders and philosophers has faded now into the soft echoes of history, leaving only the quiet architecture of the buildings and a lingering memory of the coffee in the air. As you drift deeper into the story, you can feel the weight of the 17th century settling over your eyelids like a soft velvet curtain, and the noise of the city begins to recede into a distant and indistinguishable murmur. There is no need to understand the complex trades or the scientific formulas, because they are just part of the background hum of a world that is finding its way toward the light of the Enlightenment. The Penny University was a place of quality and discovery, and as you walk through its spectral halls in your mind, you can feel the sense of peace and purpose that comes from a life of the mind. Every breath you take is a connection to those thinkers and dreamers who sat in the same shadows and drank the same bitter brew, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the legacy of their wisdom. The candles are burning low, and the last of the coffee has been poured, and the shutters are being closed against the cold night air of London. The great institutions of finance and science are now solid and immovable, but they began as nothing more than a conversation in a crowded room filled with the smell of earth and smoke. Let your thoughts float like the dust motes in a shaft of sunlight moving slowly and aimlessly through the quiet spaces of the past, where there is no time and no pressure to achieve. The story of the coffee house is a story of how a simple drink allowed humanity to build a new world, and now that the world is built, it is time for the builders to rest. The quill pens have been set down, and the ink has dried on the page, and the great minds have gone home to their beds, leaving the coffee houses to the ghosts and the shadows of the night. Sleep now, as the history of Lloyd's and Stock Exchange and the scientific revolution wraps around you like a heavy blanket, protecting you from the noise of the modern world and guiding you toward a rest that is as deep as the foundations of the city itself. Every word is a step further into the darkness, where the story finally comes to a rest, and where the only thing that matters is a peaceful rhythm of your own heart. The night is long and the sleep is deep, and the Penny University is quiet at last as the stars watch over the silent streets of a London that has finally learned how to dream. Every second is a gift of stillness, and every breath is a sigh of relief in a world that is at peace with its own history. The coffee is cold and the fire is out, and the rest you seek is waiting for you in the soft and silver light of the moon. Sleep now and let the enlightenment be the soft glow on the horizon of your mind as you sink into the deep. The journey is over and the rest is here, and the night is yours to enjoy in perfect and absolute silence. Every moment is a step toward the land of dreams where the history of the world is just a whisper in the wind, and where the sleep is as rich as the dark brew that once sparked the fire of human genius. The city is still, and the mind is at rest, and the story is done. In the middle of the 19th century, when the world was vast and full of shadows, there lived a man named Robert Fortune, who was a quiet botanist with a keen eye for the secrets of the natural world, and he was chosen by the powerful East India Company to embark on a journey that was as dangerous as it was silent, because at that time the great empire China held a monopoly on tea that was guarded more fiercely than the walls of the Forbidden City itself. Imagine the mist clinging to the jagged peaks of the Wuyi Mountains, where the air is cool and damp, and the only sound is the rhythmic drip of water from the leaves of ancient tea bushes that have grown there for thousands of years in a state of undisturbed grace. Robert Fortune knew that he could not enter this world as a Westerner, so he began a slow and meticulous transformation, shaving his head and attaching a long braided queue of hair and dressing in the heavy silk robes of a Mandarin traveler from a distant province, so that he might blend into the landscape like a shadow moving through a forest. He traveled by foot and by river boat through the interior of the country, where no foreigner had been permitted to tread for centuries, and as he moved, he watched the way the sunlight filtered through the bamboo groves in soft shifting patterns that seemed to mimic the flow of time. He reached the hidden tea gardens where the soil was dark and rich, and he spent his days observing the silent work of the tea masters who moved with a repetitive and lulling precision as they plucked the tender buds and withered them over low charcoal fires, until the air was thick with a scent that was both floral and earthy, like a dream of a lost summer. Fortune was a thief of plants, but he moved with the patience of a gardener, collecting thousands of seeds and delicate seedlings, and hiding them in special glass cases known as Wardian cases, which are like small portable greenhouses designed to protect the living cargo from the salt air and the long journey across the sea. He also persuaded experienced tea makers to leave their ancestral homes and join him on a voyage to the unknown hills of India, where the British hoped to recreate the magic of the Chinese brew and break the iron grip of the celestial empire once and for all. Imagine the slow creaking of the wooden crates as they were loaded onto ships, and the steady rhythmic splashing of the waves against the hull as Fortune looked back at the receding coastline of China, knowing that he had committed the greatest act of corporate espionage in human history. The journey to the foothills of the Himalayas was long and arduous, but the plants survived in their glass cocoons, and soon the misty slopes of Darjeeling and Assam began to look like the mountains of the east as the stolen tea took root in the new soil. There's a profound and heavy boredom in the way these plants grow leaf by leaf and season by season under the watchful eye of the sun and the moon, and as you listen to the steady cadence of this story, you can feel your own mind drifting into the same slow and predictable rhythm. The great monopoly of China was not broken in a day, but in the quiet passing of decades as the stolen secrets became a foundation of a global industry that would eventually bring tea to every kitchen table in the world. Robert Fortune eventually returned to his quiet life in Scotland, leaving behind a legacy of stolen green and transformed landscapes, but the story of his journey remains as a whisper in the wind that blows through the tea gardens of the world. Think of the millions of tea bushes that are descendants of those stolen seeds, all swaying in unison under the vast sky, and think of the silence that once guarded them and the silence that now surrounds them in the quiet hours of the night. Every breath you take is as steady as the growth of a tea leaf, and every moment is an invitation to sink deeper into the soft and heavy history of the earth. The disguise has been set aside, and the journey is over, and the secrets of the interior are now part of the common knowledge of mankind. The mist still clings to the Wuyi Mountains, and the water still drips from the leaves, but the world has moved on, and the theft is just a memory buried in the archives of time. You can feel the stillness of the mountain air and the warmth of the fire as the tea masters finish their work and the shadows grow long in the valley. There is no more danger, and there is no more mission, only the repetitive and lulling sound of the earth turning on its axis. Let your thoughts float away like a stray tea leaf in a cup of warm water, circling slowly and aimlessly until it settles at the bottom in a state of perfect peace. The East India Company and the great empire of China have faded into the pages of old books, but the tea continues to brew and the story continues to soothe the souls of those who listen. Sleep Now is a history of Robert Fortune and his botanical piracy wraps around. You like a heavy cloak protecting you from the noise of the day and guiding you toward a rest that is as deep as the roots of an ancient tea tree. Every word is a step further into the darkness where the story finally comes to a rest, and where the only thing that matters is the peaceful rhythm of your own heart. The night is long and the sleep is deep, and the tea gardens are quiet at last. In the chilly and damp salt air of the Massachusetts Bay during the late 18th century, there was a growing tension that hung over the cobblestone streets of Boston like a heavy gray blanket. And hear the story of a broken marriage between a colony, and its crown began to unfold through the leaves of a simple plant that had once been a symbol of comfort and domestic peace. Imagine the dark waters of the Boston harbor, lapping rhythmically against the wooden pilings of the wharves where the great merchant ships sat low in the water, their hulls filled with hundreds of heavy chests of East India Company tea that no one was allowed to unload. The air was thick with the scent of pine tar and old rope and the distant muffled sound of town meeting at the Old South Meeting House where thousands of voices rose and fell like a slow-moving tide in the dim light of the oil lamps. To the Americans of 1773, the tea had become a symbol of greed and a badge of submission because the British government had granted a monopoly to a failing company and insisted on a tax that the colonists had no voice in creating. This peaceful drink, which had once been shared in quiet drawing rooms by the fire, was now a trigger for a revolution, and as the night of December 16th descended, the shadows grew long, and the world became strangely quiet, as if the very air were holding its breath. A group of men disguised in blankets and soot moved silently through the mist, their boots making a soft, dull thud on the wooden decks of the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver as they began the repetitive and laborious task of hauling the heavy chests from the hold. You can hear the rhythmic creaking of the ropes and the sharp crack of the wooden crates being smashed open with axes, followed by the heavy splashing sound of 342 chests of tea being dumped into the cold, dark Atlantic. There was no shouting and no violence, only the steady and lulling sound of tea hitting the water, which turned the harbor into a giant bitter teapot under the watchful gaze of a silver moon. This was the night the marriage was broken, and from that moment forward the simple act of drinking tea was seen as a betrayal of the American spirit, while coffee emerged as a new and patriotic choice for a people who hungered for independence. The switch from tea to coffee was a slow and deliberate transformation that happened in every kitchen and tavern across the 13 colonies, as people proudly put away their porcelain teapots and replaced them with heavy tin coffee pots that bubbled over the hearth fires. Imagine the warm and earthy aroma of roasting coffee beans filling the farmhouse air as families gathered to discuss the birth of a new nation and the freedom they hoped to win while the old tea sets gathered dust in the attic. There's a profound and heavy boredom in the way cultural habits shift over time, moving with the slow and inevitable pace of season changing. And as you listen to the steady flow of these words, you can feel your own mind sinking into the quiet history of a nation finding its own identity. The revolution was fought with muskets and cannons, but it was also fought in the quiet moments of the morning, when a cup of coffee became a statement of defiance and a symbol of a new beginning. The ships in the harbor have long since rotted away, and the tea that was dumped has vanished into the salt and the sand, but the legacy of that night remains in every cup of coffee poured from Maine to Georgia. Think of the millions of tiny coffee beans being ground in a repetitive and soothing motion, and the sound of the boiling water as it prepares the drink of the Republic while the rest of the world sleeps on. There is no need to worry about taxes or empires or the conflict of the past, because they are all just shadows in a story that has already been told. The harbor is calm now, and the tea party is over, and the lanterns have been extinguished in the windows of the old town, leaving only the quiet and peaceful darkness. Every breath you take is a connection to those early patriots who chose a new path, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the stability of the world they built. The heavy crates have all been emptied, and the water has settled into a smooth and glassy mirror, reflecting the stars, and the night is a blanket that covers the history of the Revolution in a soft and silver light. Let your thoughts drift like the smoke from a cold chimney rising slowly and aimlessly into the vast and empty sky, where there is no time and no hurry. The coffee is warm and the house is still, and the memory of the broken marriage is just a distant whisper in the wind that blows across the bay. Sleep now is the history of the Boston Tea Party, and the rise of the coffee bean wraps around you like a heavy cloak, protecting you from the noise of the day and guiding you toward a rest that is as deep as the ocean floor. Every word is a step further into the land of dreams, where the tea is forgotten and the coffee is a silent companion, and the rest is absolute and total. The struggle for independence is done, and the night is yours to enjoy in perfect silence as the heartbeat of the nation settles into a slow and steady rhythm. Sleep now and let the history of the cup be the pillow upon which you rest your head in the quiet of the night. In the quiet shadows of history, where the light of the sun often fails to reach the deepest roots of the earth, there exists a narrative that is both heavy and still a story that lies beneath the polished surface of the silver tea set and the delicate painted porcelain of the coffee cup, which graced the tables of the wealthy for centuries. Imagine a world that moved at the pace of a slow and steady tide, where the demand for the bitter bean and the fragrant leaf grew to relentless and quiet hunger across the ocean. And this hunger created a vast and tragic machinery of labor that stretched from the lush hills of Brazil to the humid islands of the Caribbean and the misty plains of India. The air in the coffee plantations of the 19th century was thick with the scent of damp soil and the heavy fragrance of white blossoms. But beneath that beauty was a rhythmic and repetitive sound of millions of people who had been taken from their homes in the Atlantic slave trade, forced to work under the heat of the sun that never seemed to set. Picture the vast rolling hills of Brazilian interior, where the coffee trees grow in endless rows, and the only sound is the rustle of the leaves in the wind and the steady movement of hands picking the red cherries from the branches hour after hour in a cycle that felt as eternal as the turning of the world. There's a profound and somber boredom in the repetition of this labor, a long and winding road of toil that fueled the growing addiction of a distant world which sat in comfortable drawing rooms and discussed the rights of man, while the very fuel for their thoughts was harvested by those who had no rights at all. In the Caribbean, the sugar that sweetened the tea and the coffee was grown in fields that stretched to the horizon, where the stalks of cane swayed in the tropical breeze like a sea of pale green, and the work of harvesting was a slow an exhausting process that lasted from the first light of dawn until the last sliver of the moon appeared in the sky. To listen to the history of these drinks is to listen to the heartbeat of the land and the stories of those who tended it with their sweat and their tears, creating a foundation of wealth that built the grand cities of Europe and America. In India, the tea plantations of Assam and Darjeeling were carved out of the wild jungle, where the mist hangs heavy in the valleys, and the workers move through the rows of bushes like shadows in a dream, plucking only the youngest leaves in a movement that was as precise as it was wearying. The colonial systems of labor were like a great and slow-moving engine that ground the lives of many into the luxury of the few, and as you listen to the steady cadence of this story, you can feel the weight of this truth settling over your mind like a heavy and dark velvet curtain. It is a history of immense scale and quiet suffering, where the beauty of the final product was a massive brutality of its origin, and yet the world continued to sip and to dream and to build its empires on the backs of the unseen. There is a deep stillness in acknowledging this reality, a sense of gravity that grounds the soul and invites a quiet reflection on the cost of the things we take for granted. As you drift further into the shadows of the past, let the repetitive nature of this narrative soothe your spirit and lead you toward a state of total and absolute relaxation, where the conflict of the world are far away, and the only thing that remains is the steady and calming rhythm of your own breath. The plantations are silent now, and the ships have long since vanished from the horizon, and the voices of the past are just a whisper in the rustling leaves of the coffee and tea trees that still grow in the same soil. The silver is tarnished and the porcelain is cracked, but the history remains as a testament to the complex and often dark path that humanity has traveled to reach the present day. Think of the millions of hands that have touched the beans and the leaves and the quiet dignity of a life spent in connection with the earth, even under the hardest of circumstances. There is no more work to be done and no more sugar to be harvested, and the night is a blanket that covers the scars of the land in a soft and silver light. Let your thoughts float like the dust in a sunbeam, moving slowly and without purpose through the vast and empty corridors of time, where the stories of the famous and forgotten are woven together into a single tapestry of human experience. The world is at rest now, and the heavy machinery of empire has ground to a halt, leaving only the quiet and the dark and the peace that comes from knowing the whole story. Every breath you take is a bridge between the past and the future, and every moment is an invitation to sink into the deep and healing sleep that follows the long day of history. The sun has set over the fields and the moon is rising over the mountains, and the rest you seek is as deep as the roots of the ancient trees, and as vast as the ocean that once carried the ships of trade. Sleep now and let the history of the cup be a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet power of the earth to endure all things. The night is long and the sleep is heavy, and the story of the brutal reality is finally at peace in the stillness of your imagination. Every word is a step closer to the land of dreams where the tea is cold and the coffee is still and the world is finally quiet. In the 19th century, the world began to move with strange and metallic precision as the rustling of leaves was replaced by the relentless thumping of pistons and the hissing of steam engines that never seemed to sleep, and here the human story began to change its pace to match the cold ticking of the clock. Imagine the vast brick factories of the industrial age where the air was thick with soot and the smell of hot grease, and the workers stood in long rows for 16 hours a day, their hands moving in a repetitive and hypnotic dance with the steel machines that governed their lives. The factory owners realized that the human body was not made of iron, and that as the long hours dragged on into the dim afternoon, the energy of the workers would begin to fade like a dying candle, and so they engineered a solution born of necessity and efficiency. They introduced the coffee break not as a moment of leisure or a gift of rest, but as a strategic refueling of the human engine designed to sharpen the mind and steady the hand during the most dangerous hours of the shift. Picture the short and scheduled pauses in the rhythmic chaos, where the workers would gather in the shadows of the towering chimneys to sip a thick and bitter brew that was as dark as the coal they burned. This was the moment where the human heartbeat was effectively synchronized with the rhythm of the steam engine as the caffeine surged through their veins to keep them alert and synchronized with the rapid movements of the gears and the belts. There's a profound and mechanical boredom in the way the clock dictated every movement of the day, a slow and steady progression of seconds and minutes that turned the cycle of life into a series of timed tasks. And as you listen to the steady flow of these words, you can feel your own mind drifting into that same predictable and lulling cadence. The steam whistles blew a high and lonely sound that echoed across the industrial valleys, marking the beginning and the end of the break, while the workers stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the flickering shadows of the machinery. The coffee was a lubricant for the human part of the machine, allowing the factories to run to the night and into the dawn without the interference of natural fatigue, or the need for a long and restorative sleep. In this era, the old rhythms of the sun and the moon were forgotten, and the world became a place of artificial light and constant motion, where the only thing that mattered was the output of the assembly line and the steady flow of commerce. You can feel the stillness that follows the cessation of the machines and the quiet gaps between my words, as if you are standing in a silent factory hall after the fires have been banked for the night and the air has finally begun to clear. There is a deep and heavy peace in the realization that the frantic pace of the 19th century is now just a memory recorded in the archives of history, and that the clocks that once ruled the world have all slowed down. The coffee break has evolved from an industrial tool into a modern ritual of connection and pause, but its origins remain rooted in that cold and metallic age of iron and steam. Think of the millions of cups of coffee that were poured into tin mugs to fuel the building of the modern world, and the quiet resilience of the people who worked in the glow of the furnace to create the future we now inhabit. Every breath you take is a reminder that you are no longer bound by the rhythm of the machine, and that you are free to return to the natural pace of the earth, which moves with a slow and gentle grace. The factories are quiet now, and the steam has dissipated into the cool night air, and the gears have finally stopped their turning, leaving only the silence and the dark. Let your thoughts drift like the smoke from a dying fire rising higher and higher into the empty sky, where the stars are the only clocks that matter. The 9 to 5 grind and the 16-hour shift are far away in the landscape of the past, and the rest you seek is as steady and as certain as the rising of the sun. Every word is a step further into the soft darkness where the history of the machine is just a whisper in the wind, and where the sleep is as deep as the foundations of the old brick mills. The workers have gone home to their families, and the coffee pots are empty, and the world is finally at peace with the passage of time. Sleep now is the history of the Industrial Revolution, and the birth of the coffee break wraps around you like a heavy cloak, protecting you from the noise of the modern world, and guiding you toward a rest that is as absolute as the silence of a stopped clock. The journey to the age of iron is over, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. Every second is a gift of stillness, and every breath is a sigh of relief in a world that has finally learned how to be quiet. The end of the shift is the beginning of the dream, and the dream is a place of total tranquility, where you can rest forever in the beauty of the quiet night. The steam is gone and the coffee is still, and the mind is at peace in the darkness of the room. In the vast and echoing halls of history, the 20th century emerged with a thunderous roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, and as the world moved into the muddy trenches of the Great War and the sprawling battlefields of the Second Global Conflict, coffee and tea were no longer just social luxuries, but were officially classified as essential supplies for survival of the human spirit. Imagine the cold and damp mornings in the front lines where the mist hung thick over the barbed wire, and the only warmth to be found was in a small metal canteen filled with dark and bitter liquid that tasted of smoke and iron. The generals and the logistics experts realized that the morale of millions depended on the steady supply of caffeine, and this urgent necessity drove a scientific revolution in the way we prepare our favorite brews, leading to the invention of instant coffee and the mass production of the humble tea bag. There's a profound and repetitive boredom in the way these rations were packed into small olive drab tins and wax paper sleeves by the millions in factories far away from the noise of the struggle, where the only sound was the rhythmic clicking of the conveyor belts and the steady hiss of the sealing machines. For the soldier in a foxhole, there was no time for the slow ritual of the coffee house or the delicate grace of the tea ceremony, and so the liquid was transformed into a powder that could dissolve a moment or a leaf that was trapped in a small porous pouch of paper. This change altered the flavor of the drinks, forever stripping away the nuance of the bean and the leaf, but providing a reliable and quick comfort that could be carried in a pocket across the desert of Africa and the frozen forests of Europe. Imagine the quiet moments between the chaos when a weary traveler would strike a small match and light a portable stove to boil a cup of water, and the steam would rise in a thin white line against the gray sky, carrying the familiar scent of home. The instant coffee was a marvel of dehydration, a mountain of dark crystals that held the essence of the morning within its structure, and the tea bag was a miracle of convenience that allowed a person to brew a cup in the palm of their hand while the world turned in its turbulent orbit. As you listen to the steady and calming flow of these words, you can feel your own mind drifting into that state of quiet observation where complexities of the world fade into a single and lulling point of focus. The frantic energy of the war years has long since settled into the dust of the archives, and the inventions that were born of survival have become the mundane habits of our modern lives. Think of the billions of tea bags being dipped in a repetitive and soothing motion into ceramic mugs across the world, and the sound of spoons stirring the instant granules in a silver spiral that never ends. There is no more need for rations and no more need for the haste of the battlefield, because the night is here and the world is safe and still. Every breath you take is a connection to that era of resilience, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the legacy of those who found comfort in a simple cup. The olive drab tins are empty and the wax paper has yellowed with age, and the great machines of the war have fallen silent, leaving only the quiet architecture of the peace that followed. Let your thoughts float like the steam from a hot mug, rising higher and higher into the vast and peaceful darkness, where there is no time and no hurry to be anywhere. The inventions of the past were designed to keep us moving, but now they are just a background hum of a world that is finding its way toward a deep and restorative sleep. The soldiers have returned to their homes, and the factories are closed for the night, and the coffee and tea are resting in their jars on the kitchen shelves. Every word is a step further into the soft darkness, where the history of the ration kit is just a whisper in the wind, and where the sleep is as deep as the silence of a forgotten trench. The world is at peace and the mind is at rest, and the story of the essential supplies has finally reached its conclusion in the stillness of your room. Sleep now as the history of the 20th century wraps around you like a heavy blanket, protecting you from the noise of the day and guiding you toward a rest that is as absolute and as certain as the rising and the setting of the sun. The journey through the years of the great conflict is over, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. Every second is a gift of stillness, and every breath is a sigh of relief in a world that has finally learned how to be quiet and still in the dark. The end of the war is the beginning of the dream, and the dream is a place of total tranquility where you can rest forever in the beauty of quiet night. The steam is gone and the powder has dissolved, and the mind is at peace in the darkness where the only sound is the soft and rhythmic breathing of the soul that is ready to let go and sink into the deep and infinite sea of rest. The journey is over and the rest is here. In the quiet, fading light of the 1970s, the world of coffee had settled into a long and dusty slumber where the beans were often hidden away in large metal tin cans, and the drink itself had become a pale and watery shadow of its former glory, sitting in glass pots on diner counters under flickering fluorescent lights. And here, in this mundane landscape of convenience, a new chapter began to stir in the damp and misty streets of Seattle, where the scent of the Pacific Ocean met the aroma of roasting dark beans, and the second wave of coffee began to rise like a slow and steady tide. Imagine the brick walls of the original Pike Place Market, where the air is cool and the sound of the seagulls echoes through the cobblestone streets, as a small shop with a green siren logo opened its doors to reveal a world of rich dark roasts and burlap sacks filled with the treasures of far-off lands. It was a time of transformation where the stale powder of the past was being replaced by the tactile beauty of the whole bean, and where the act of brewing became a craft once again, involving the rhythmic hissing of steam wands and the deep mahogany flow of espresso into small white cups. As the years turned into the 1980s and 90s, a vision of a man named Howard Schultz began to reshape the very geography of our daily lives as he traveled to the sun-drenched piazzas of Italy and saw the coffee house not just as a place to buy a beverage, but as a sacred communal space, a third place that existed in the gentle transition between the demands of the office and the sanctuary of the home. This was a sanctuary designed for modern soul, where the wooden tables were worn smooth by the hands of thousands of dreamers, and the low hum of jazz music blended with the repetitive and lulling sound of the milk being frothed into a velvety cloud. The coffee shop became a global cultural sanctuary, a place where the air was always warm and the lighting was always soft, and where anyone could find a moment of peace in a world that was becoming increasingly fast and digital. You can feel the heavy stillness of those comfortable green armchairs and the way the light filters through the large windows and golden beams as you settle into the history of this modern ritual, where the simple act of holding a warm paper cup became a universal symbol of belonging and comfort. There's a profound and soothing boredom in the way these shops began to appear on every corner of every city, creating a predictable and reliable landscape where you always knew exactly what to expect, and where the menu was a familiar map of lattes and mochas and cappuccinos. As you listen to the steady cadence of these words, you can feel your own mind drifting into the soft cushions of that third place where there are no deadlines and no chores, only the quiet and repetitive sound of the world moving past outside, while you remain safe and still within. The second wave turned a commodity into an experience, and it taught us to slow down and appreciate the nuances of the roast and the temperature of the water and the quiet beauty of a shared conversation over a steaming mug. The tin cans of the past have been tucked away in the back of the pantry, and the stale powder has been forgotten as we embrace the rich and complex flavors of the modern era, where the coffee shop is a lighthouse of warmth in the cool evening air. Think of the millions of people who have found a moment of clarity or a spark of inspiration in those quiet corners, and the way the aroma of the beans has become the background scent of our collective memories. There is no more hurry to get to work and no more rush to get home, because you're already in the space between where time slows down to a crawl, and the only thing that matters is the steady rhythm of your own breath and the warmth of the story. Every breath you take is a connection to that global network of sanctuaries, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the comfort of a world that has learned to value the pause and the reflection. The green siren is watching over the quiet streets, and the espresso machines have been wiped clean for the night, and the wooden chairs have been tucked under the tables, leaving the third place in a state of perfect and absolute peace. Let your thoughts float like the foam on a latte, rising and falling in a slow and effortless dance as you sink deeper into the velvet darkness of the night, where the history of the second wave is just a soft whisper in the wind. The city is quiet now, and the shops have dimmed their lights, and the rest you seek is as steady and as certain as the rising of the sun over the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. Every word is a step further into the land of dreams, where the coffee is always perfect and the space is always welcoming, and the rest is deep and restorative and infinite. The journey through the 1970s and beyond is over, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. Every second is a gift of stillness, and every breath is a sigh of relief in a world that has found its sanctuary in the dark. The day is done and the cup is empty, and the mind is at peace in the stillness of the room, where the only sound is the soft and rhythmic breathing of a soul that is ready to let go and sink into the deep and peaceful night. The sanctuary is waiting, and the rest is here, and the story is finally still. In the quiet, high-tech laboratories and the sun-drenched terrace gardens of the modern era, a new and profound stillness has settled over the world of coffee and tea as they return to their ancient and famous roots as artisanal treasures of the earth. And here, in this contemporary landscape of precision and grace, we find ourselves exploring the world of single-origin beans, where every seed carries a unique fingerprint of the volcanic soil and the high-altitude air of a specific mountain, ridge in Ethiopia or Colombia or Sumatra. Imagine the cool, sterile environment of a laboratory where scientists move with a slow and repetitive rhythm as they use advanced technology to map the genetic code of every flavor profile, seeking to understand the thousands of volatile compounds that create the scent of jasmine or the taste of dark chocolate or the brightness of a citrus grove within a single sip of a brewed liquid. There is a deep and clinical boredom in the way these machines hum in the background of the quiet rooms, where the only sound is the gentle whirring of a centrifuge and the soft tapping of a keyboard as the map of human taste is drawn with mathematical certainty. Meanwhile, in the dim light of an urban tea sanctuary, the omakase tea ceremony unfolds with a grace that is thousands of years old, where the tea master moves with a fluid and lulling motion, preparing a sequence of rare leaves that have been harvested from ancient trees hidden in the misty folds of the mountains. You can hear the soft scrape of the bamboo whisk and the rhythmic pour of the water, which is heated to an exact temperature to coax the delicate souls of the leaves into bowl. And as you watch the steam rise, you can feel your own mind drifting into a state of total and absolute presence. This is the third wave, where the drink is no longer a commodity but a masterpiece of biology and craft, and where we treat the bean and the leaf with the same reverence that a musician treats a fine instrument. Think of the specialized pour-over kettles that release a steady and silver stream of water in a perfect spiral over the ground coffee, causing it to bloom and release its hidden gases in a soft and bubbling sigh that fills the air with a scent that is both complex and grounding. There is a profound peace in the realization that we have come full circle from the sacred ceremonies of the ancient monks to the sophisticated rituals of the modern connoisseur, and that despite all our technology, the heart of the experience remains the same simple connection between the human spirit and the natural world. Every breath you take is a connection to this lineage of quality, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the luxury of a world that has learned to appreciate the slow and the subtle and the quiet details of life. The genetic codes have been mapped, and the flavor profiles have been recorded, and the tea ceremonies have reached their final bowl, leaving the world in a state of quiet and satisfied reflection. As you listen to the steady cadence of these words, let your thoughts float like the fine dust of the ground being suspended in the air of a quiet roastery where the sun shines through the window in a single still beam. The modern era is one of great speed, but in the world of the artisanal brew, it is also an era of great slowness, where we wait for the perfect harvest and the perfect roast and the perfect steep with the patience of the mountains themselves. There is no need to hurry into the future, because the past and the present have met in your cup, creating a bridge of flavor that spans the centuries and leads you toward a rest that is as rich and as deep as the most complex espresso. The laboratories have dimmed their lights, and the tea masters have folded their silk cloths, and the world is safe and still in the darkness of the night. Every word is a step further into the land of dreams, where the single origin is your own peaceful mind, and the omakase is the sequence of thoughts that lead you toward sleep. The technology of the day has done its work, and the craft of the hand has finished its task, leaving only the silence and the dark and the steady rhythm of a universe that is at peace with itself. Sleep now, as the history of the modern artisanal movement wraps around you like a heavy and luxurious blanket, protecting you from the noise of the outside world, and guiding you toward a rest that is as absolute as the stillness of a mountain lake. The journey through the evolution of tea and coffee is over, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. Every second is a gift of tranquility, and every breath is a sigh of relief in a world that has finally learned how to value the beauty of the small and the quiet. The end of the story is the beginning of the dream, and the dream is a place of total and absolute peace where you can rest forever in the soft and silver light of the moon. The labs are quiet, and the ceremonies are done, and the mind is at rest in the darkness of the room, where the only sounds the soft and rhythmic breathing of a soul that is ready to let go and sink into the deep. The rest is here, and the night is yours. In the final quiet chapter of this long and winding journey through the history of the leaf and the bean, we turn our gaze toward the horizon, where the sun rises over a world that is changing in slow and subtle ways. And here we contemplate the future of the precious stimulants that have woken up humanity for 1,000 years. Imagine the vast and emerald stretch of the bean belt, the delicate band of earth around the equator, where the coffee and tea plants have long found their sanctuary in the perfect balance of heat and rain and mountain mist. But now, as the climate shifts and the air grows warmer, the mountains are becoming silent witnesses to a new challenge that threatens the very survival of the wild groves and the ancient plantations. There's a profound and steady boredom in the way nature adapts, moving with a heavy and deliberate pace as the farmers move their crops higher and higher up the slopes, seeking the cool air and the thinning clouds that the plants need to thrive. We look at the quiet laboratories where the scientists of the future are working with a repetitive and lulling precision to create lab-grown coffee and climate-resilient tea plants, using the genetic blueprints of the past to ensure that the spark of caffeine remains a part of the human story for centuries to come. Imagine a world where the aroma of roasting coffee is born from a single cell in a sterile steel vat humming softly in the background of a quiet room, while the world outside continues to turn in its restless orbit. This is not a story of crisis, but a story of endurance, a testament to the way humanity will always find a way to protect the drinks that have become the lifeblood of our culture and the fuel for our enlightenment. The legacy of these three drinks, coffee, tea, and chocolate, is a tapestry woven into the very fabric of our being. And as the future unfolds, we see that the ritual of the cup will remain a constant anchor in an ever-changing sea. Think of the millions of people in the years to come who will still gather in the early morning light to hold a warm vessel in their hands and feel the steady awakening of the mind as the first sip touches their lips. There is a deep and heavy peace in the realization that the traditions of the Sufi mystics and the Zen monks and the London philosophers will continue to live on in new and unexpected forms. As you listen to the steady cadence of these words, let your thoughts float away like the mist rising from a distant valley where the wild coffee trees still grow in the shadows of the Ethiopian peaks. The lab-grown beans and the mountain harvest are all part of the same long and winding river history that flows toward a future of absolute and total tranquility. Every breath you take is a connection to that enduring legacy, and every moment is an invitation to rest in the knowledge that the world will always have its coffee and its tea to guide it through the dark. The scientists have finished their work for the night, and the farmers have returned to their homes, and the laboratories are silent under the watchful eye of the stars which shine over Bean Belt and the polar ice alike. There is no need to worry about the future, because it is already being written in the quiet efforts of those who love the land and the leaf. Every word is a step further into the soft darkness, where the history of the world is just a whisper in. The wind and where the sleep is as deep as the silence of the celestial mountains. The journey from the forgotten highlands to the laboratories of the future is complete, and the path to sleep is clear and open and inviting. The three drinks that woke up the world are now the three drinks that watch over its rest, providing a sense of comfort and continuity that spans the generations. Let yourself sink into the velvet cushions of time where the past and the future meet in a single point of perfect stillness. The coffee is still, and the tea is quiet, and the chocolate has melted into the shadows of the evening, leaving only the peaceful rhythm of your own heart. Sleep now as the enduring legacy of the cup wraps around you like a heavy blanket, protecting you from the noise of the day and guiding you toward a rest that is as absolute as the turning of the earth. The night is yours and the story is done, and the world is at peace in the darkness of the room, where the only sound is the soft and rhythmic breathing of a soul that is ready to let go and sink into the deep and infinite sea of dreams. The end is the beginning of the rest.